of Extension and Development Studies at Indira Gandhi National Open University has started MA in Extension and Development Studies. And to discuss the components of this program, we have an eminent scholar, Professor Kumar Bidas, who is Vice Chancellor of FM University, Odisha. We are going to have discussion on economic growth, economic development and sustainable development. Sir, the concepts of economic growth, economic development and development are very confusing to our students. They consider that development means economic development or economic growth means sustainable development. So I would request you to elaborate why the three concepts, that is economic growth, economic development and development, how they are different from each other. What is the ambience of these three concepts?
These three concepts are quite different. First is economic growth, which is very narrow concept, which is very myopic, reductionist view of development. That is called economic growth, which we are very much obsessed for last 1 or 2 decades. For last 2 decades, we have been very much concerned and obsessed with economic growth, which is very narrow view, myopic view, very short term and a reductionist view of prosperity and development. Next is economic development. Economic development concept is, or development concept is again a little broader but still narrow. But sustainable development is the broadest view of world prosperity. World sustainable uninterrupted development is called sustainable development, which takes into account all three aspects: social aspect, environmental aspect and economic aspect. All three dimensions are included in sustainable development, but in development and economic growth, they are all narrow views. All three things are different. For example, economic growth is very short term, very quantitative, whereas development is not quantitative. Development is both quantitative and qualitative. That is, economic growth is short term, where it is but development and short term is very long term, very multi-generational. But economic growth is only concerned with only one generation or 2 generations, or which is very foreseeable future. But sustainable development is very multi-generational concept, which refers to millions and millions of years to come. Therefore, it is economic growth is unidirectional, unidimensional also, and whereas development is multidimensional, multidirectional, and it is economic growth is always planned, spontaneous, which is discontinuous change also, which refers to growth without development, which refers to a solution of advanced countries. And it all refers to economic factors, whereas economic development or sustainable development refers to economic and non-economic factors. It is a solution of underdeveloped countries. It is a problem of underdeveloped countries, and it refers to growth with development, and it refers to continuous change, not discontinuous change. It refers to gradual, steady change, not planned or spontaneous change. It refers to qualitative and quantitative. Therefore, there is difference between growth and development, and that development has to be sustainable, has to be multi-generational, the approach has to be intergenerational, and it must emphasize duly the ecosystem approach to development pattern.
The perception of villagers, their expectations from development, they want that infrastructure in the form of roads, electricity, health facilities, whereas the perception of people in urban areas, their perception of development is different. They expect more flyovers, more infrastructure, more malls. So these are the two different perceptions in rural and urban. Similarly, in different geographical and ecosystems, the understanding and expectations in the name of development, again, people varies from place to place. So I would like you to explain to our viewers that how development is inconsistent with economic development.
There is inconsistency, is very clear cut. If you see across the country, advanced country and backward country, the advanced country's perception is different about development, and backward country's perception is also different. Similarly, rich man's perception, urban dwellers' perception is different, whereas poor man and rural dwellers' the perception of development is different. Because the development that the city people, metro people, they think of more consumption, more production, more of variety, more of quality. They think that way. But rural people, particularly the rural people of the backward countries, for example, our Indian setup, and if you compare America and India, then American people, they are spoiling their habit of overconsumption, their luxurious way of life. Similarly, in our cities also, metro, people, their way of life is very luxurious, very sophisticated, very fashionable, very comfortable. They require more energy, they more AC or AC car, all these things they use, and that is also environmentally deleterious. It has negative effect on the environment. Whereas the rural man, he cannot reduce his habit of consumption. Whereas the rich man or the city dwellers, metro people, they do not reduce the habit of overconsumption, over wastage, whereas the poor man or the rural people, they cannot survive, therefore they have to cut the trees. They also exploit the resources, they also make deforestation, they cannot stop their habit of cutting the trees, whereas rich man in the metros people or the city people, they do not reduce the habit of overconsumption, overproduction, over exploitation of resources. So cannot and do not, both are equally responsible for environmental degradation. Therefore the inconsistency appears that these people, they think of consumption, higher variety, whereas the poor man, he is more compatible, more consistent with the natural way of life. That's why this economic growth, which is very attractive for the city dwellers, metro people, that attractiveness is really inconsistent with the development pattern which is expected to prevail in the future. The rural people, they think of happiness, they are culturally rich, they think of development which has a cultural dimension, which has a social dimension, which has a religious dimension, which is not with metro people. Metro people only think of production, only think of quantity, whereas rural people, they think of quantity and quality both. They think peace and prosperity and happiness of their family and culture. They have a social life, they have a traditional system, whereas metro people, they simply are blinded towards production, more consumption, more money, more GDP, more GNP, more saving. They are all money oriented.
Yes. So that means the rural people, they see urban people as a model, and they want to ape or they want to copy that lifestyle, which is not possible in rural areas.
Yes.
Because of lack of infrastructure, and because it is not possible for a country to have so much energy, to divert so much energy for the rural areas. So that means there is a flaw either in our education system or in our understanding that we should teach to our rural people that what the life they are leading is more sustainable and more
compatible
in the long run. So how this can be achieved? Because you rightly say that the rural people, their lifestyle is more sustainable compared to urban people. And seeing the population growth of our country, we find that our rural people, they try to copy or they try to lead a life of urban, which is not sustainable. So how we can?
Yes, in my view, in our country, this is unfortunate. The trend of migration from rural to urban is so rampant, so strong tendency of the people to go from a village to the city, which is not happening in advanced country. Advanced country, there is also reverse migration from city to the village. But here only one-way migration from village to the city. That is unfortunately deleterious. It has adverse effect on the environment, city congestion, city urban sanitation problem, congestion problem, traffic jam, pollution. Everything is happening. All bad things which are unintended in urban centers is happening because of our strong tendency to migrate from the village to the city, because city life is comfortable and fashionable and more sophisticated. But in very advanced countries, the reverse trend is also happening. The very old people, those who are after retirement, they used to migrate to their own village, which is equally comfortable but not fashionable like the city centers.
Maybe in coming years in India also we will have a reverse migration. When there is some infrastructure in rural areas, then this trend will also start.
It should happen.
It should happen. Now coming to the components of sustainable development and the indicators of sustainable development, can you just elaborate that what are the components of sustainable development, giving examples from rural areas, and what are the indicators of unsustainability in urban areas? Because I want our students to understand that what are the unsustainability indicators in urban areas and what are the sustainable issues and indicators, components in rural areas. Because you very rightly say that rural life is more sustainable, whereas urban is not unsustainable.
I said the urban life is incompatible to the natural system, natural ecosystem, whereas rural life is more compatible. Their way of living, their way of life, their lifestyle is more compatible, consistent with the nature. So natural order is to be maintained and honored, and their way of life is more sustainable. Therefore, they are more contributing to sustainable development in the sense, because sustainable development has three major components. One is environmental sustainability. It must be ecologically balanced. It must preserve the biodiversity. That is environmental aspect. The second aspect is socially must be acceptable. It should be socially equitable, socially just. It should not have any discrimination, any atrocities, any dowry or any slavery or any child labor. So it must be socially acceptable. The development process should not be based on child labor. Suppose a country, for example, Thailand, a country which is having rampant child labor system. India is also having child labor system, bundle labor system. So the development which is based on child labor system or a slavery or a discrimination or a subversion of people, or where the people are disempowered, people have no voice, then that development is really not development. It should be socially acceptable. It should be culturally consistent. This is second aspect. Third aspect is economical viability. It must be efficient, which we are duly emphasizing and overemphasizing. Economic efficiency, economic productivity is maintained all through. For the last 60 years, India is very successful in economic efficiency. Everything is viable. Everything is economically profitable, investment-wise, saving-wise, and everything. In economic parameters, India is the second fastest growing country. But in environmental parameters, India's rank is 101. That is Environmental Sustainability Index. There is a measurement. That in that measurement, India's ranking is 101, whereas economic parameters, India is number 2. So this inconsistency occurs because economically we are prosperous, but environmentally, socially and culturally we are really bankrupt. We are becoming bankrupt. That's why this difference should not occur. So we must be also number 2 in sustainability. Yeah.
Right. Now, since we find that people in rural areas where they use ITK, they have conserved their resources. The wastage is very limited because of their ITK, and production is also not very high. Some people say, they give example of high yielding variety. They say that India, the agriculture scientists, they went for high yielding variety, or they went for inorganic use of inorganic chemical fertilizers in agriculture because they wanted to achieve productivity. But do you think that we have achieved that agriculture productivity? Now there is a time we should go back to our traditional agriculture, traditional farming system, so that in terms of sustainability, at least our rural life is more sustainable, as you rightly say. So do you think that use of ITK and use of our traditional farming and agriculture system will feed our growing population? At the same time, it is, as you rightly said, that it is also sustainable.
Yeah. All said and done, for last 60 years after independence, we have been modernizing agriculture. But last 2 decades after this corporatization, after this liberalization policy has come, agriculture is suffering from slow growth, and there is deceleration in economic growth in terms of agricultural sector. The productivity has gone down. Production may be going up, but the productivity is going down, and agricultural sector is really not prospering. Though we are talking and overemphasizing on high yielding varieties, productivity both are going down in agricultural sector because the productivity is attractive. The focus on productivity is very attractive, but it is deceptive in the sense that it is having very adverse effect on the environment ultimately. So because the agricultural practices that we have been adopting in the name of HYV, it is hungry for fertilizer and thirsty for water, and it is causing water salinity, soil erosion, soil fertility is lost. So ultimately productivity is slowing down, and ultimately agricultural sector is affected. Therefore, also another thing we must have observed, there are so many agricultural universities. There are so many agricultural practices we have been developing, but is it really producing something good for the village? The villagers still they are having some indigenous knowledge which is very slow but steady, which is very unattractive but very meaningful for the future, which has meaning for in the long run, and that is evolving process of development. Is experimental, it is not conclusive, it is all experimental, it is slow, and that is a very rich treasure of resources which the farmers, particularly for particular small farmers in the villages, the tribal people, they have their resources, and sometimes we award the farmers for their indigenous knowledge, but we do not practice in the field. We give awards in the different ceremonies for the farmers preserving indigenous knowledge, but really we do not respect, we do not practice. Just it is for award only. Therefore, indigenous knowledge is very short, and that is nothing but practicing the concept of small is beautiful. Small farmers are really having their own knowledge, and that knowledge is very sustainable and compatible to the natural order. Therefore, the modernization process, which is overemphasizing productivity efficiency, is incompatible to the natural order. The ecosystem is damaged by high yielding varieties, by our overproduction, which is overemphasizing efficiency, overemphasizing profitability, and we are shifting from farm to non-farm practices. We are shifting from crop to non-crop production, so which is also dangerous practice, because we are running for money and profit. So that running for money and profit is okay, viable, economically viable, but in environmental sense, in social sense, is not viable, because farmer suicide is occurring. So farmer suicide is a social problem. It's also economic problem. It's a cultural problem. So culturally, we are not really tuned. So our culture, our society, our environment must be supportive of economic practices. So economically, it may be viable, farm to non-farm, food to non-food. Cash crop we are growing, but it's very profitable, but farmer suicide is occurring because of it is not compatible to the society, it's not compatible to the environment also. So that is the reason why there is difference between this, and ITK must be our main source of sustainable development, and that will only respect the need of the people, not the greed of the people.
Right. And very rightly you said that indigenous knowledge is localized knowledge, like different geographical regions have specific indigenous knowledge which is suitable in their region also only.
Yeah,
and
region specific, cultural specific.
So we need to build up an awareness amongst our farmers, amongst our people, and in general, so that people respect their indigenous knowledge system and revert back, they try to go back and follow the indigenous agricultural practices. But our education system talks where we talk of computerization, we talk of use of more and more technology, modernization, and it does not talk. So that means there is a need for introduction of understanding of indigenous knowledge right from the school age, so that by the time a student comes to college, he understands and respects his traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge system. So please throw light so that how this can be achieved.
Yeah, indigenous knowledge in the villages, in the tribal areas, must be nurtured, must be protected, must be replicated. We should not only give awards and rewards or recognize we should not give a lip service. Really, we should realize high time, and it must be promoted, and that must be maintained. That is slow but steady, very unimpressive but meaningful. It's unimpressive. In terms of profit, not very impressive. In terms of productivity, it may not be impressive, but it is sustainable because the soil fertility is maintained, and salinity is not occurring. Soil erosion is not happening, and therefore agricultural practices of the villagers, of the indigenous people, those who were practicing long before, that must be promoted, and that must be protected, and that must be realized that it is part of natural system. They are more knowledgeable. He may be illiterate, he may be uneducated, but his knowledge is more than any agricultural scientist. The agricultural laboratories, the agricultural universities, they must give due attention to this indigenous knowledge. So indigenous knowledge is huge. The biodiversity resources of our country, particularly India is very rich in biodiversity, but there is depletion of the species. The species are extinguished, and therefore the the species and the biodiversity, treasure of biodiversity in our country is extinguished and depleted. That must be protected somehow by our modernized practices of the laboratories.
You have very rightly said that our biodiversity is depleting because we have not documented the traditional use of our bioresources. They were used by our forefathers, and gradually we have phased them out. We consider a medicinal plant to be a weed, and we just weed it out and throw out of agriculture field. Earlier they knew the use of these weeds and they utilize, so they conserve. So there is a need for building awareness on the biodiversity at different levels, at different geographical regions, so that biodiversity is maintained and people are reverted back to. So do you think that to achieve sustainable development, we are going to have, on the one side in the urban areas, there is a growth model which is more techno-friendly, whereas in rural areas, which is where more population stays, and where sustainability is already there, components of sustainability is there, but that is to be strengthened. So these two models we are going to have, how we are going to balance the two, and so that our development really becomes a sustainable development.
Yeah, there is high need for making a balance, compromise between this technocracy and the real situation. Technocracy is overemphasizing on efficiency, productivity, more production, more profit. These are the overemphasis of technology. So technological, even professionalism. Over-professionalizing is also a problem.
Right.
Over-professionalizing or over-expertising, suppose you are specializing in one thing. The specialization is sometimes a shelter of long-term inefficiency. If you are specializing in one thing, your knowledge is so specialized, so esoteric, so relevant also in the long run. You just emphasize on your efficiency, productivity, and whatever you think, that is only for one generation, for your own benefit, one generation, your own benefit. You are thinking of profit or okay, but socially in the long run it is going to have a bad effect in the society. In the environmental sense, also going to have bad effect on the environmental degradation. So environmental quality is going down. In terms of water scarcity, water is not going to be available after a few years. The price of water is more than price of the milk now.
Right.
Price of the water is more than price of the drinks, liquor now. So around the globe it is happening. Around the globe it is happening that how the water is becoming costlier. Drinking water is becoming more costly. After 5 years, after 10 years, you will find this is 10 times more than the petrol. Petrol price will be cheaper, water price will be more, and this is unfortunate. And that is the gift of modernity.
Right.
And therefore, our modernization process, which is overemphasizing technological efficiency, that technocracy is itself to be revised. That idea is to be revised. That it must be anything that is being promoted must be for sustainability, must have a sustainability, must have ecological balance. So ecological balance must be maintained.
Right.
Ecosystem must be preserved. We must duly emphasize on the quality of life. We must overemphasize on quality of life, not overemphasizing on level of living. So standard of living is promoted in the cities, but standard of life is not promoted.
Right.
So standard of life is different. We need to have a high standard of life instead of high standard of living.
Right.
High standard of living does not give you prosperity and peace, whereas high standard of life will give you peace and prosperity. So true prosperity, depends on better quality of life, high standard of life, better family, good society. We must think. So therefore, a prosperous society is a healthy mother which produces a healthy child.
Right.
Not vice versa. An unhealthy mother cannot produce a healthy child. So healthy child is our economy. Right. Economy is a child, but society is the mother. So healthy society, environmentally healthy, socially healthy, must produce economic healthy system.
Right.
Not vice versa. So healthy child cannot be expected from an unhealthy mother. Right. Therefore, we must have a good society, good tradition, good respect for the traditional knowledge. We must build a society instead of building an economy. So we are myopic. We are so short-sighted. We are running after efficiency, productivity, profitability at the cost of a bad society. We are forming a bad society. We are running a bad society. Our culturally, we are becoming bankrupt. We are emotionally unavailable to our society. Emotionally, I may be a good husband, but I am emotionally unavailable to my wife.
Right.
So I am not emotionally present in the family, but though I am financially very strong.
Right.
Therefore, financially, one can be very prosperous, but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, one can be bankrupt. Right. Therefore, let us have a good society.
Right.
And that is only possible by only following Gandhism, which says that peace depends on your mind only. It is not really connected to money or prosperity or the material life that one has. That's why there must be a balance between rural life and the urban life. A rich man's life and poor man's life. A poor man is not necessarily unhappy, and a rich man is not necessarily happy. Similarly, city man is not necessarily comfortable. A rural man is not necessarily uncomfortable. And that's why these things must be balanced. Therefore, peace of mind or happiness does not depend on these material things. So I'm not exactly promoting a yogic of life or a saintly life. I'm just promoting a humanism concept. Well, we must be humanist.
Which is sustainable.
A humanism is only sustainable. And sustainable development is only promoting humanism and realism.
And happiness.
And true happiness, genuine happiness, genuine prosperity, genuine quality of life.
Right.
Thank you very much.
So I hope our viewers and students, they must have understood the difference between economic growth, economic development, and how Professor Das has rightly said that happiness is not happiness cannot be purchased. Happiness is not money, or happiness cannot be purchased from money. Happiness cannot be purchased from resources. A person living in urban areas with more economic income may not necessarily be happy, or a person living in the rural areas with less liquidity in hand maybe is more happy. He must emphasize the quality of life, which is sum total of social, cultural, faith, religious, and overall environmental. That is the quality of life which can be attained by not by our following our urban or our economic growth model, but a balance where he has. So I hope our viewers, it must be I am very happy the way economist has presented this view against the economic model or growth model is really
against the mainstream thinking.
Against the mainstream thinking. So this is a very good model. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.